students emailed into us questions that they felt were important to them and their families. So if you're happy to start taking questions, that would be great. And we could start with Ellis Rouse, who's a Year 11 student.
Funding students in Staffordshire schools remains far below national averages. What would you all partly do to bring about fair funding for all students across the country?
I don't know if you want to go first.
I will, fine. You're absolutely right, and it's been the case for many, many years. Governments of all colours have not funded Staffordshire as well as I think Staffordshire should be funded. It's because of the way the funding formula works. It's put together in different blocks. The present Conservative-led government has added a further £390 million to schools across the country to ensure that they are better funded. And that meant a little bit more money came to Staffordshire. I believe not enough. So I went to see the Education Minister, David Laws, to ask him to look again at the way our county is funded. And he said, you know what, after having a look, I agree that there's an issue here. I will put Staffordshire into a pilot scheme to see how funding can be better enabled for our county, which means that schools in Staffordshire will, I trust, receive more money in the future. But I think it really also means that the county has to look at the way it distributes and allocates money across its three funding blocks and is prepared to fund schools better. But certainly that's one of the jobs that MPs have to do, I think, when they feel that their local community is not being sufficiently helped by the government. They've got to go to ministers and complain and raise a flag. So £390 million nationally, promise from David Laws locally to help our Staffordshire schools.
Thanks, Alice. Well, I haven't got that kind of input into government. I do know historically from my time at Staffordshire County Council that, as Chris says, this has gone on forever and ever, and we used to send down deputations to the government saying that we needed to get fairer funding for Staffordshire. I think it's a case of government probably needs to look at the whole issue about how they fund. It's just been that historic thing that down south they get more money, and the further north you get, we seem to get less and less. So for me, it would be about having a whole root and branch look at the whole thing. I'm quite interested if Staffordshire is going to be a pilot scheme. I will look into what Chris is saying and see quite how that's happening. It's just that historic thing, and for some reason we can't get past that, but we need to radically change it. But that's not, the school education funding isn't the only thing that we need that radical change on. There's quite a few things that have stayed how they are forever, and sometimes it's a case, I know this is very radical, it's a case of chucking it up in the air and saying, let's look at a blank sheet and see what we do, because the way this is done at the moment is definitely not fair. It's stayed how it is for too long.
Happy with that, Alice? Yeah. Good responses, thank you very much. Next, this question really is for you, Carol. Matthew Stockton, Year 8.
Why should we vote Labour when they financially ruins our country when last in power?
Oh, thank you. Right. I've got 20 pieces of this paper for you to take away with you, talking about the myth about the deficit. It's a case in politics. You say something often enough and everyone will believe you. The actual facts belie that. So please, if there's one thing you should always do throughout your life, is never take first hand what you hear, especially in the media. And probably, especially from politicians. You need to make sure that what they're telling you is the truth. A former Minister of ours, Mike O'Brien, has put some stuff together. He's the candidate for North Warwickshire, you may have heard of him. He's in our local paper quite a lot. And let me just read you one little bit out of here. Fact. In Margaret Thatcher's years, public spending averaged 40% of gross domestic product. John Major averaged 38. David Cameron has averaged almost 41%, but Tony Blair and Gordon Brown averaged only 37%. So on a historical comparison, 1997 to 2010 was a time of strong management of public finances, and those figures do not exclude the last 2 years after the banking crisis. And, you know, the banking crisis was the banking crisis. It was global. It wasn't a Labour mess. And we haven't said that loud enough or often enough. It is an absolute myth. You know, you've only got to look at, research into it a little bit to know that it happened on the other side of the water. It came across. If you actually, because I'm sure you're all online and all on the computer and Googling things all the time, if you put in Gordon Brown and the deficit, you will find that all around the world he is held up as being an architect of stopping it going further than it could have done. So yeah, I'm quite really passionate about this because we didn't refute it enough. We've let the Tories say absolutely every time they open their mouth in the first few years, and still it's all Labour's fault, we're clearing up Labour's mess. No, it's not Labour's mess. It's a global economic downturn.
To what Carol has said. Carol began by reminding you that you shouldn't trust what politicians say, and then she quoted some figures provided by Mike O'Brien, who is a politician, a Labour politician. So, if you look at what the IFS says, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, if you look at the OBR, the Office for Budgetary Responsibility, if you look at any think tank which is independent, they will say that the last Labour government ran a deficit. That's to say it was spending more of your money than it was earning every year since 2001. Not 2008 when the recession began, not 2009 when it got worse, but from 2001 when supposedly the sun was shining. And that meant that by 2008, when we had the economic crash, we had built up an even bigger national debt and were spending even more than we were earning, which made it very difficult for us to get out of the trouble that we had gotten ourselves into as quickly as Germany, which had a much more competitive economy, was able to do. And that's why I remember knocking on doors back in 2010 on the Glasgow Road, and window after window after window, you would see repossession notices in those windows as the banks foreclosed on people's homes. Under Labour, you weren't just losing your jobs, you were losing your homes as well. And that's because of the economic mismanagement of the last government. We've also brought with me, Alice has got at the back, some materials that will help you when you have that mock election later on. And in them, there's another quotation from another politician, a Labour politician, a guy called Liam Byrne, who was a Labour Treasury Minister. And he told the truth because he left a note on his desk the day he left government in 2010 for his Conservative successor, and it was written and it said, "I'm sorry, but there's no money left." That is the testimony that Labour bequeathed to you and your folks in 2010.